Hey guys, welcome back to my video tutorials. This time I brought Docker containers to your home, a new online tutorial on Docker uses, which is simple, practical, and powerful. So what we're going to cover in this series, as usual, all my video tutorials are real time, where I'm going to explain the real time scenarios and hands-on implementation, how Docker is being implemented. Learn how Docker services are used in real-time projects through step-by-step demos and practical experiments. And this video series is ideal for beginners who doesn't have any Docker experience because I am going to start from the beginning, from the very basics, and also the professionals who want the real-time Docker experience. So some of the snippets or the highlights in this video series show from how to install and configure Docker in your local, then how to deploy various services like your .NET services, Mongo services, Kafka services, and other services into Docker. Then how to analytic services like the Lens or can you of the pods. So it's going to be very exciting. It's going to be very real time scenarios and this series we are going lots of advanced concepts in the development and type. So who are the target audience? Like all my videos will be development point of view. So this is ideal for developers, IT professionals, and also the cloud in are looking for hands-on experience with Docker. They can this series, and here I'm going to cover all the real-time scenarios with automated process. So who are looking for jobs, uh, Docker and implement Docker in the real-time projects, they can series. Let's begin the show. So in this video, we will see a lot of fundamentals, the definitions, lot of theory part. So let's start with what is Docker. So Docker is an open platform and set of tools that uses operating system level visualization is called containerization. So this word container and containerization will use more often in this video series. So let's keep and understand what is container. So Docker is an open platform set of tools that use operating system, which is container, help developers building, shipping, and running their application in a consistent and isolated manner across different environments. Packages and application, all its dependencies like code, runtime, libraries, etc., to a standardized unit called a container. If you have experience with deployment methodologies, the traditional deployment methodologies, so you may understand deployment, the traditional way deployment was very tedious. Have to list out each and every component, each and every small information like the version number. You have to include in your deployments, and if any of those components get missed, your entire deployment got failed, and you have to go through the cycle again and again. So earlier in the traditional way, the deployment was very tedious, but in Docker, everything it's simplified. So like whatever you are using, the operating system or the libraries or the software with the versions you are using, can just build, ship, and run the application in a consistent. There is no discrepancy in your deployments if you are using Docker because the way the Docker works, It's isolated, and it's comes like a packaging, like bundling everything. So like uh, simplifies the whole deployment by using the containers. So as I mentioned, what was there before Docker? So before Docker was released, was released in 2013. So the application deployment involved a mix of physical servers like virtual machine and earlier forms of containerization technologies. Like you have to bundle your uh, all the components you use in your development, and if you miss a single component, your entire um, um, deployment get failed. So now what we can do with Docker? Docker is a platform for building, sharing, and running applications in containerization. It packages application with all its dependencies in a standardized view called container. Just build your container, deploy your container in various uh, environments, ensuring it runs consistently across different environments. So in your when you're developing your application itself, you build a Docker in your development box, which includes all the dependencies, your .NET version, your DLLs, your NuGet packages, your runtime, CI/CD pipelines, everything. And when you are deploying, just take this container and deploy into different environments. That's what we are doing in the Docker. So more bulleted points, what we can do with Docker. Key things you can do with Docker. Eliminate, it works on machine, works on my machine problem. So earlier, you are working in a traditional deployment mechanism. So most of the time, the developers and the deployment team, they got the conflicts. And when they come to the developer says, it works on my mission. So this is a like very useful, very frequently used term, works on my machine, but it's failing on the server. Yes, because might forget might forget the version number. A simple or silly mistake might uh, fail the entire deployment on the servers. So it eliminates that kind of discrepancy and create a consistent development environment. If you are using Docker, you will feel more confident on building different environments and streamline CI/CD pipelines. Integration of CI/CD pipelines with the Docker makes your deployments smooth and consistent and confident. Deploy and scale applications efficiently. You can scale up and scale down your applications in Docker efficiently, and simplify application management, self-hosting. Sometimes you can just define the CI/CD pipelines automated fashion and just set the frequency. You can do the development and push the code to your dev build, and you can set the frequency that automatically deploys the things into different environment. Because now you are using Docker, the deployment effort is greatly minimized. Experiment with new tools safely. You can just, if you're thinking to integrate any tool, you can just test in your dev environment. That's it. That automatically works in the other environment. Collaborate, delay. Like if you multiple people are working in organize single piece, the collaboration will be the deployment collaboration very easy. So what are the advantage of Docker? The primary advantage of Docker revolve around portability, consistency, resource efficiency, and speed in application development and deployment. So all I mentioned in the earlier slides also, but just you are using Docker in simple terms, your development and deployment life will be very easy because it packages an application and all its dependencies into a single standardized unit called container. Just build your container, deploy your container. That's it, which run reliably on any system that support Docker. whether it's a Windows system, Linux system, or any other operating system. If the Docker is running, then on the operating system, then your application will run. Again, some of the key advantages of Docker: environment, environmental consistency, resource efficiency, portability and flexibility, rapid deployment and scaling, isolation and security and isolation is also very important, and it's one of the key feature of your Docker. Isolation, your application will run isolation, and security, all can implement. You can secure your Docker containers, simplified management. So then, what exactly the Docker built by? Docker is built primarily on operating system level virtualization technology. So mostly on the Linux and uses several core components and technologies. Some of the core technologies used in Docker: operating system level virtualization, which is a containerization, Linux kernel features. So it uses inbuilt Linux kernel features. Go programming. There's a program called programming. So Golang, we call it as a Golang. This is primarily used as a programming language to build Docker, like contain, container and runc. These are the two other components will build and run the client server architecture. Because as a developer, you have to use your like Docker's. So there will be Docker servers, and will have the Docker desktop, which will connect with. So let's focus on few fundamental components in Docker. One of them is image. What is image in Docker? So a Docker image is a lightweight, standalone, and immutable print or template that contains all the necessary components like the code, runtime, libraries, the environment variables, and configuration files required to run a specific application in an isolated environment. So you are going to build the images. I'll show the images containers in the Docker desktop later. But the image is nothing but the application which you are writing the code. You are including your runtime. Like if you are using um, .NET CLR, and the libraries. What are all the libraries you are using for your application, and any environment variables. These environment variables are configurable. You can define different environment variables for different servers, and configuration files. So all the configurations file for your application, and a run specific application in isolated environment. So your image is nothing but your application with all the dependencies, single print or a template. So you can think a Docker image like a receipt or a class object-oriented programming, while Docker container is the running instance or object created from the image. So here image, your application, when you're creating your application, will create your application, and image is nothing but your application and its dependencies. What is container we'll see later, but a container is nothing but the object of your images. That means from your image is nothing but the code and its dependencies. Your container is nothing but a deploy version of your image. So now, what is a container in Docker? A Docker container is again a lightweight, isolated, and executable software package. The earlier slide, we have seen what is image. Image is the application, the code, and its dependencies. And Docker container is an executable software package that includes everything needed to run an application: the code, runtime, system tools, libraries, and settings. running instance of a Docker image. So some of the advantages of container: isolation, portability, efficiency, consistency are few characteristics of Docker container. So again, when you're developing your application, you build image. When you are deploying your application, deploy that as a container. That means your code, suppose I developed an application, I have one image, and when I deploy that application in dev, uh, testing, and production, I'll have three different Docker containers. Image will be one, containers can be many of different environments. Let's see how to install Docker. So it's pretty easy and simple steps. You want to install Docker on your system, you can install it whether you are using a Linux operating system or Windows operating system. I have Windows operating system. So go to docs.docker.com. So this is the official page for Docker, docs.docker.com. You can click on Get Started. Then you can click on Get Docker. So here there are different options: Docker for Windows, Docker for Mac, Docker for Linux. You can choose, or you can click on the buttons operating Windows. So I'll click on Docker desktop. Again, desktop, Docker desktop for X or 64 or any other. You can just click on this, which will download um, deployable file, and you can install in your. I already installed. Just download this and run and install in your. So once you install Docker in your system, you can see a logo here, Docker desktop. Just click on it. So my Docker, so this is called Docker desktop. As a developer, like easy interface where you can see all the images, all the containers, and very it. So here we have different options. As I mentioned, containers, nothing is there we are going to deploy, but containers will show all the containers and with its status, whether it's running or it's running or not, what is the name and what version it has, everything. Then images will show all the images, and here you have the local and my hub. This will connect to a server, Docker server organization. The local will show all the local. So we are going to let's there are volumes here. Kubernetes. We can create clusters. Explore more about the builds, earlier builds history here. This Docker hub show you can connect Docker hubs. So mainly we will deal with containers, images, Kubernetes. The coming videos will what is to. You know my favorite technology is .NET. So we are going to see how to install a .NET application in Docker, how to create a .NET, not how to create, how to deploy a .NET Core application in Docker, and how can you access that the deployable file. So if you are familiar with IIS, so earlier the .NET application we used to deploy in IIS, but now instead of IIS, I'm going to deploy that into Docker. So you can correlate you are a Windows developer, can correlate Docker with IAS. Let's see how to deploy the .NET application, .NET Core application, Docker, step by step. So I'm creating a new MVC .NET Core application, naming it as Docker sample. Going here. So in the next step, I'm selecting the framework here, .NET 9, authentication type, configure HTTPS. So here we have an option called enable container support. Either you can select here, you're selecting this option, the Docker file is going to uh, add your project when it's creating itself. But even I can add it later. The Docker file, Docker stuff, I can add it later and I leave this option. I don't select this option. Create a .NET Core C. Yep, this is my application which is running perfectly in the local. So if there is no Docker stuff, now we are going to add Docker of the deploy. So how can I enable Docker my application? So so you have to add a file called Docker file. You can add it manually, or as I mentioned earlier, you can enable the checkbox so that is Docker file will be added by the time it's creating. Now I'm going to right click, add. There is a option called Docker support. Click on this and will ask which operating system or Linux. Select Linux because I'm using the free version of the Docker. The free version of the Docker on Windows, it supports only Linux. Want to support Windows, get some subscription, but uh, the Linux only. So I'm choosing Linux and the file is Docker file or .NET SDK. Docker and image version like the .NET 9 or these are the different images. Alpine you can, I'm going to use Alt. And the solution, like what is the solution for the path for application? When I click on add, Docker file will be, name itself is a Docker file. So again, I'll explain all of this information later, but you can see this is the Docker file. There is no extension for Docker file. A Docker file will be created and Docker ignore file will be created. So this ignore will tell what files need to be ignored when applying this. And the time you added here, you can see it completed building. Let's go Docker file. I did not add anything here. Again, I'll go in detail later, but it's the Microsoft .NET 9 version. They're the exposing and vision project file. Yeah, remember these ports because it's very important next steps. So now your application uh, has equipped with Docker stuff. You can deploy your can deploy this application into Docker interface. So the time when you add the Docker file itself, it built the Docker. If you see the steps, you can see built was checking for the Docker stop in verifying the Docker stop is running or not, then verifying the operating system matches the target operating system. So it's pulling the images, any Docker existing images for this application, or then it's building the image, and it's done all this stuff. And yep, I did not do anything. Time I added this Docker file, uh, completed all this. Let's open the Docker file and see. See, did it deploy anything? Yes, it did. And so it built this image, Docker Marteti Docker sample, the name of the application itself. And it's a dev tag. It added the dev tag, and it gave an image ID and created the time it get created and the size. And this is the ASP.NET image which we need. If you go to containers, whatever image it added here, it deployed in this container. This is the application, this is the code and all the dependencies, and this is the executable file. That means deployment version. So now if you see your .NET, so if these are the different IAS Express, um, by default it's selected as a container Docker file, right? So you want to access this, just when you run this, it automatically deploys into Docker. You can see here the image, the execute the image which deployed into. But um, development you may not use time. Different way you can deploy the Docker. Let's clean up this Docker desktop. There are commands also. Just show detail. So now I don't have any Docker image. I don't have any container. I'm going to use a more proficient and more automated way by using the commands. I can build this image. I can build the container that I can access the application without running this. This way, you have to run the Visual Studio, but in the servers, you don't run the Visual Studio. By using the commands only, you have to deploy the code. So there is a more proficient way where you can use the commands and deploy your applications in Docker. That's way. Now, in the command prompt, now I want to first build the image. For that, Docker base build -t. Again, I'll explain each and every the command and what is this video. You can give the name, space, and you have to give the dot. We'll tell that this location you can find the Docker file. So if you see here, Docker file, Docker file, and I'm issuing this command so that we'll build Docker image based on the Docker file. Run this command. You can see step by step loading the Docker file, transferring the Docker file, reading the contents, uh, running, and it's trying to PS project all the dependency. Now your Docker, refresh your containers. There are no containers. Click on images, not Docker. Just I built an image. There is no container. That means I just built an image. Now I have to deploy the code in container. Let's do that by using that. So now you created a Docker image, and now you have to deploy the Docker image, your Docker container. So for that, Docker run -d -p 8080 name of your container, name, dev. So then you have to provide the image name. So the image name is not80 Docker image, which is match with the image name I gave. And this port, this is the Docker port, and this is the second one is the Windows. So we are exposing our application on 8080, 8081. 8080 is the HTTP. So this 8080 should match with the second port. If you give a different port here, application is not going to deploy, but you cannot access the application. Just run this, and it just gave the ID. That means successful. And the time you did this, earlier it was not running, but now it's running. And you can click on the containers. You can see container name, which I gave the same, and the image name was there, and this is the container ID, and this is the port which I am exposing my application. So let's see whether you can access the application or not. Just click on this link. Yes, you can access privacy. There is nothing in my application, and I am not running the visuals. Now I am accessing the application which I deployed in the Docker. You no need to launch URL here, and just open the HTTP host 8080 and access this. As long as this container is running, you can see the container running, top, start, it. Just deployed your first application, the first .NET application into your. Well done, we did a great job by deploying our first .NET application in Docker. So these are the steps, how to deploy your .NET Core application in Docker, create a Docker file and Docker ignore file. I've shown how to create by using Visual Studio. You can do same by using different ways. You can explore. We will explore them next. And use this command Docker build -c the image name dot. This is going to use the Docker file, build the image, create the image in Docker desktop, and then deploy your image, this container, and expose the same into this. You can access the application by using localhost export exposed. So far, what we covered: the basics of Docker, seen the definitions, details of the Docker, then I've seen Docker component image explored image locally, and we discussed how to install Docker in local. Then first .NET application or application, how to deploy into your example. Thank you so much for watching my video. The Docker is really crazy. So excited to sh- all this sample. And there are a lot of excited topics awaiting for you. I'm going to explore all of them and I'll share with you. Thank you so much for watching my. Please let me know back and let me know if you have a specific cover a specific topic in Docker. Please let me know. Definitely make the video. Happy coding.